Right, so we go back to one of our top stories now, and that's the elections taking place in Ethiopia today. And these are delayed elections, of course, and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been selling them as saying that he's determined to show that Ethiopia is a thriving democracy. To get some analysis on what's happened today and what these elections might mean, we're now joined by one of our regular contributors on Ethiopian matters, Dr. Awol Allo, who's a senior lecturer at the School of Law at University of Keele in the United Kingdom. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you. A big day for Ethiopia today.
Well, it really depends on how you look at it. I think there are constituencies in Ethiopia, very small, who believe that this election marked a significant progress for the Ethiopian state. But the majority of people in that country believe that this is a dark day, in the sense that instead of addressing the kind of multifaceted, deeper structural challenges that the country is facing, this election would simply deepen those divisions, would complicate the possibility of reaching any eventual political resolution that the country needs. So it all depends on who you speak to. But I think for those small minorities, particularly in Addis and in the Amhara regional state, these are largely constituencies with whose view, Abiy and his government seems to ideologically align. These are also the same constituencies who largely support the war in Tigray. For this group of people, yes, this is maybe a good day, but for the vast majority of Ethiopians, it's not.
All right, let's talk about what happened today. What reports have you been getting? We're seeing from the wires that in some regions, two in particular, the opposition parties are crying foul already.
It's very interesting because the so-called opposition parties who are running in this election are opposition parties who are ideologically aligned with the ruling party. It's really important to understand that in the context of what is happening in Ethiopia, because there are two key visions that divide the Ethiopian state today. And one of the groups that holds a vision of the future that is based on a multinational federated Ethiopia are basically excluded from participating in this election. So these are groups within the Oromia regional state, the Tigray regional state, and other regions as well. Those who are aligned with the Prime Minister's Ethiopia First ideology are groups who are participating in this election. So you have a few opposition political parties within this broader ideological category who are participating in the election. Even they, according to some reports, have been complaining about some shortcomings and unnecessary and illegitimate interference by authorities in various parts of the country. And they have been detailing their concerns to the electoral board.
Remind us why some of those regions have been excluded from this election.
Well, of course, the Tigray regional government is one of the regions that is entirely excluded from the electoral process, mainly because there is still a civil war ongoing and massive atrocities that the United government, for example, termed an act of ethnic cleansing. So the security situation in that region simply doesn't allow for an election to be held, let alone a credible, fair and free election. But the situation security-wise is similar for other parts of the country as well. But the intensity of the confrontation is not as high in terms of the threshold as it is in Tigray. You have an armed conflict in the Oromia regional state, in those parts of Oromia where you have intense military operation going on. People did not participate in election. The same thing in the Benishangul Gumuz region. But overall, about 105, I believe, constituencies have not taken part in this election today, including the entire Tigray regional state.
All right. Is this boycotts or actually being restricted from voting?
Well, in the Tigray regional state, the government had decided that elections could not be held there. But even if the government was really to hold elections in Tigray, who would participate in that election? Who would recognize that election as legitimate? Because people participated in an electoral process before the war, overwhelmingly voted for TPLF. TPLF was subsequently deposed from power and then declared a terrorist organization by the government. So the conditions for an election or of some sort is simply not there. That is a huge war zone where the Ethiopian military and the Eritrean military conducting operations, and there is simply no way that elections could be held there. But there are, for example, opposition political parties who boycotted the election. This is the case, for example, in the Oromia regional state, which is the largest region where about a third of MPs come from. So of the 547 seats in the federal parliament, 178 come from Oromia. And in this region, the Prime Minister and his party began a process of systematic and a calculated elimination of the political opposition from the political scene long before the war in Tigray. So when the Prime Minister dissolved the former ruling EPRDF coalition and created the kind of pan-Ethiopian kind of unitary political organization called the Prosperity Party, the dissents that were present within his own political party and also outside his political party were brutally suppressed. But gradually, as situations went on, key opposition figures were rounded up and locked behind bars. Most of opposition offices have been closed. Just to give you one example, the Oromo Federalist Congress, one of the parties that boycotted the election, said that of the 206 offices that it has opened over the last 3 years, 203 of those offices were closed. And the same problem was happening to the Oromo Liberation Front, which is one of the oldest and widely popular political organization, where since the organization returned to the country, it has been the subject of consistent and persistent harassment. The chairperson of that political organization, OLF, is currently under house arrest. So these two parties felt that the political landscape is such that participating in this election would simply mean legitimizing the ruling party, and they would not be able to offer an alternative to the electorate, and they boycotted. So generally, the election is being held at a time when there is significant difference among the key stakeholders about the country's future, and unfortunately, while some parties are supporting the election today, the majority are boycotting. The day after the election, Ethiopia would have to face its fundamental challenges.
All right. How will Parliament look, do you think, after this election? We know that there's a new party of the Prime Minister, the Prosperity Party. Then questions are, you've got these opposition parties that do well in certain areas that might win seats based just on where they are. Will Parliament look different, even though Abiy Ahmed likely will still win?
Now, this is an interesting point because although this is a government that kind of tries to present itself as different from the previous government, this government still continued the mandate that it has earned in 2015, where that party, the EPRDF, in 2015 won 100% of the seat. It's the same mandate that they had until today, although the government was trying really hard to establish a clear break between itself and EPRDF. The members of parliament who are now running in the election are the same people who served that government for the last 2.5 decades. Most people in the cabinet today, most people serving in key government agencies are basically people who came over from the previous government. Now, a lot of these people will return as new MPs. under a different party, under a different ideological dispensation. But in terms of the practices, in terms of the mindsets and the way people think, I think things will remain more of the same. Yes, I think for strategic reasons, they would allow some opposition into parliament. And because this is crucial for Abiy's desire to project himself as somebody that is committed to democracy, committed to difference of opinion, but not when it comes to people who hold radically different views from that of his own. So these ideologically homogeneous groups that are aligned with the Prime Minister would be allowed some seats. I think some level of debate would be allowed to happen in Parliament. And then the government would use that as evidence that this Parliament is better than the previous Parliament. This government is more representative than the previous government. Democracy is a process, and the international community therefore should give them the benefit of the doubt that they have given the previous government. And you can already see this strategy really in place in the ways in which the government is trying to defend what it is doing. They were saying, for example, well, there are certain cases where the courts, for example, decided against the government, and those kinds of things didn't happen in the past. Well, we do know that these are very much part of the broader authoritarian tactics where you allow the judicial system sometimes to second guess the executive branch of government. You use that as an evidence of an independent judiciary in the country. There are also debates around, how the current chair of the electoral board was a former opposition party leader who was imprisoned by the previous government. And therefore, the idea is that she has no reason to be somewhat sympathetic to the ruling party. But ideologically speaking, the chair of the the chair of the electoral board is very much aligned with the current government. So while I think Parliament would pretend to be somewhat lively and vibrant in terms of at least allowing certain discussion, those discussions in terms of how the political landscape is set up in Ethiopia is circumscribed, and the debate would only take place among elites that are committed to the same ideological vision in the country.
All right, Dr. Awol Allo, we're going to have to leave it there for the time being, but I hope we can chat again later in the week once the results are tabulated, and then we can start talking in detail about some of those challenges that you say the Prime Minister will still have headaches over even after the results. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.